For the past 2 years, I've been writing a book about gangster rap. As a result, I drive around town a lot conducting research, which basically means blasting the likes of NWA or Tupac at full volume. This has made intersections downright hilarious. People in the other cars look over, let out a little laugh, and carry on with their lives. Of course, there's a certain privilege in being the butt of a joke. The skinny white dude rocking out to the Chronic is hilarious. However, I suspect many of us know the situation would play out differently if I were a man of color. Doors would lock, windows would roll up, and the other drivers would stare ahead, waiting anxiously for the light to turn green. I would like to use this experience to spark a discussion of something I have come to call the mark of criminality. I imagine the mark of criminality as a kind of scarlet letter that marks primarily black men in the United States as threats to civil society. The mark of criminality isn't the literal kind worn by Hester Prynne in Nathaniel Hawthorne's famous novel, but it is ubiquitous across political and popular culture. In short, Americans have been taught to regard black men as criminals, to be watched, feared, and when necessary, harshly punished. As I speak, the United States is the incarceration capital of the world, imprisoning 1 in 100 of its adult population, or 2.3 million individuals. According to the same Pew Center on the States report that reveals our staggering national incarceration rate, 1 in 15 black men over the age of 18 are currently behind bars. 1 in 9 black men between the ages of 20 and 34 are currently locked up. How does this happen? My argument to you is that the ways we talk about crime in everyday conversation, political discourses, as well as popular culture, help give form and justification to the kinds of policies that have made our modern prison system what legal scholar Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. Therefore, any effort to address mass incarceration in America must include efforts to understand and change the racially charged ways we think and talk about crime. In October of 1994, South Carolina resident and married mother of 2, Susan Smith, told police that an armed black man forced her from her car and drove off with her 2 young sons, Michael and Alex. For over a week, law enforcement, friends and family, as well as local and national media, searched earnestly for these 2 boys. Smith eventually confessed to murdering her 2 sons. Now, the most obvious victims of Smith's lies were Michael and Alex. But why was she so quick to blame a black man for her horrific acts? Why did we spend a week believing her? As it turns out, Susan Smith is not the first person across recent history to blame imaginary black men for criminal acts. Indeed, we recently had one such act right here in Baton Rouge. In all such cases, if only for a fleeting moment, people bought these fictitious stories. My argument to you is that the success of such lies hinges as much on our instinctive associations between race, gender, and crime as they do on the deceitful virtuosity of their authors. The long story of the mark of criminality dates all the way back to the end of slavery and the collapse of Reconstruction, and runs right through the 20th century. Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes, so let's begin when the mark of criminality began launching us into an unprecedented and racially lopsided age of mass incarceration. During most of the 1970s, the United States incarcerated about 200,000 of its adult population. By 1987, that number had ballooned to 600,000. The mark of criminality had become a standard tool of contemporary domestic politics. During his presidency, President Ronald Reagan oversaw legislation that, among other things, funneled millions of dollars into local police departments for waging war on crime in general and drugs in particular. Reagan's heir to the White House, George H.W. Bush, actually instructed his Secret Service security detail to buy a bag of crack cocaine across the street from the White House so that the president could use it as a prop in an upcoming speech. Bush's most masterful use of the mark of criminality came during his successful 1988 presidential bid against Democratic Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis. In the now legendary Willie Horton ad, we see an ominous picture of Willie Horton, an African-American man who was in a Massachusetts prison. We then learn how, when he was out on furlough under Dukakis' governorship, he kidnapped a white couple, stabbing the man and raping the woman. The message was clear. Bush would protect you from the Willie Hortons of the world. Dukakis would not. Media scholars generally agree that this ad appealed to long-held white fears of the black male predator. Bush understood how to wield the mark of criminality for his own political gain. The consequences, however, live and breathe in our prisons to this very day. In addition to political spectacles performed by the likes of Ronald Reagan and George Bush, as well as Democratic President Bill Clinton, I'm an equal opportunity offender, the 1980s and 1990s also saw an explosion in sensationalistic news coverage of crime, as well as scandalous television shows like Cops and America's Most Wanted. With every word uttered and image projected that reinforced the mark of criminality as a centerpiece of popular culture and political culture, came increasingly punitive laws that set mandatory minimums for repeat offenders and created racially lopsided drug laws. Evidence that mass incarceration prevents crime is virtually non-existent. But there is ample evidence that prisons are deeply corrosive to communities as well as state budgets. Former convicts lose their right to vote in virtually all states, have practically no job prospects, and are often one slip-up away from violating their probation or parole. Furthermore, as our states continue to cut funds for K-12 and higher education, children in the most disadvantaged sectors of our society face increasing probabilities that they will end up behind bars because of diminishing chances and opportunities. A public transit police officer shoots an unarmed black man as he lay prone on a train platform in Oakland, California. A notoriously violent and paranoid neighborhood watch captain shoots a 17-year-old black man as he heads home from a nearby 7-Eleven. The Oscar Grant and Trayvon Martin cases are obviously controversial, but they are joined together in our shared history by a common vocabulary of criminality that inspires fear in American voters, and if only for a moment, provided Susan Smith the perfect alibi for her horrific crimes. The mark of criminality's history is vast, and it is still very much with us today. The question, of course, is, what is to be done? In 2007, I was part of a campaign that convinced Texas Governor Rick Perry to commute the death sentence of my friend Kenneth Foster. Kenneth, an African-American man from San Antonio, was condemned to die under a deeply flawed Texas law. Kenneth was present the night Mauricio Brown shot Michael LaHood, but took no part in the actual murder. Our campaign would have failed were it not for the leadership of Kenneth and his family, because they spoke out and challenged the crass caricature of Kenneth as a horrific thug. He became a father, son, grandson, husband, poet, and for me, a friend. Any effort to address our criminal justice policy in the United States must be led by people most directly impacted by this disastrous system. This is not a problem in need of saviors, but ordinary people capable of developing new ways of thinking about, talking about, and responding to crime in our communities. For our own parts, we can begin making choices about what we say when we talk about crime. We can also choose what we will and will not tolerate from the mouths of others. Ask your friends what they mean when they refer to a bad neighborhood. Challenge them on their use of terms like ghetto or thug. Don't shy away from awkward conversations about the Trayvon Martin case. But while the way we conduct ourselves can have an impact on our culture, history reveals that real change relies on concerted organizing and advocacy. The state of Louisiana is in desperate need of a more robust culture around incarceration. No state in the Union incarcerates a higher percentage of its population than Louisiana. That means we are the prison capital of the world. The best way to challenge the mark of criminality is to replace it with different, more just ways of talking about crime. For example, treating incarceration as a social justice issue connected to racism and poverty encourages our elected officials and our neighbors to change their own thinking on these matters. If you're involved in such work or would like to be, I want to meet you. I've lived in Louisiana for less than a year, and I'm hungry to work with my neighbors to begin addressing our state's shameful reputation for incarcerating its most vulnerable citizens. If the purpose of a TEDx talk is to promote ideas worth spreading, let's use conversations after the talk to enact those ideas. There's no telling what kind of music I'll listen to on my drive home tonight. Whether it's NWA, Arcade Fire, Miley Cyrus, they're all on my iPod. I will drive through many Baton Rouges. I'll journey through neighborhoods of great economic despair, and I'm told significant danger. I'll then return to a gentrifying neighborhood whose diversity I desperately hope continues. I'll also be able to predict where I'm most likely to see police cars, traffic stops, and other signs of law enforcement. Now, statistics don't lie about where crime happens in our communities. But hopefully I have made a compelling case that the ways we talk about crime have very real impacts on people's lives. Understanding how the mark of criminality illuminates the deep connection between our criminal justice system and the ugly racial ghosts of our past is an important first step toward having conversations that will lead us to a more just resolution to one of our great national shames.